Okay, good evening. I'm Dana Plunkett. I'm the Director of Counseling, 7 through 12 at Needham High School. And joining me this evening from the department is Aisha Thomas to help us get through the presentation around the financial aid process. For many families and students, usually around the post-secondary financing is the first time that students sort of start to enter in and understand what family finances look like and the impact that the post-secondary process has on that. From the counselor's perspective, we encourage families to start that conversation as soon as they begin the post-secondary process. So students' hopes and what they want to do with their post-secondary process is in line with family finances, so the two aren't going in divergent directions. But it often is the first time that that becomes a topic of conversation. And this evening is an opportunity for us with our panel to help families understand the financial aid process as it relates to the post-secondary planning. This evening I am recording the presentation, and that will be available on the counseling website as early as tomorrow, so that if you know somebody who is not able to make it tonight, that they have the recording as a available for them, and also for you as reference if you need to sort of go back and listen to any portion of this evening for your own frame of reference. Finally, we will do a Q&A. So if you have questions, you can put your questions in the Q&A and we will address them at the end of the webinar. So feel free to put your questions in as we go along, and Aisha and I will address those at the end. So without further ado, thank you again for joining us this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Aisha.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Aisha Thomas, and I'm one of the school counselors in the counseling department. We are excited to offer you this financial aid webinar. The financial aid process is a vital part of the college admissions process. As you begin to explore colleges with your student, it is important for you to know how the financial aid process works and what you should be doing to prepare for the financial aid application process. We are grateful to have experienced financial aid professionals from Bentley University to lead this webinar and to help us learn about the various types of financial aid, what application materials colleges need, and how your financial aid is determined using helpful examples. I would like to introduce you to our experts who are leading the webinar tonight from Bentley University, and turning over the program to them. We have James McGeehee, Director of Financial Assistance, Lauren Sullivan, Executive Director of Student Financial Services. They will be leading us through the intricacies of the financial aid process. So turning it over to you, Lauren and James. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to be here. We're going to go over just some high-level stuff, and while we are from Bentley University, we're going to try to keep it as general as we can because we know that there's a lot of variety out there. So a little bit about the agenda. We'll go over what is financial aid, how to apply through the FAFSA and through another common app called the CSS Profile, a little bit of an introduction to how need is determined, some information about financial aid options, and then we'll go into the Q&A at the end. So what is financial aid? When we think about financial aid, we're really talking about a few sources here. Gift aid, that's the aid that you don't need to repay. It's grants and scholarships, federal student loans, as well as work opportunities. And with these types of aid, they typically come in two forms, and that's need-based aid and non-need-based aid. This presentation is really going to focus on the need-based aid options out there for you and how to apply for those. And with that, there's also sources of financial aid for need-based. This can be from the federal government in the form of Pell Grant. That's also where your federal student loans are coming from. It can come from colleges themselves. A lot of grant funding is really going to be institutional. And there also might be opportunities for outside scholarships through your high school or through search engines, or perhaps some state aid, particularly in Massachusetts, for students who are high need and might have Pell Grant eligibility. And we'll talk a little bit more about those outside sources later on in the presentation, and using free search engines to try to identify them. But when you're getting a financial aid award package, we're giving you all of the aid that we know is out there that we are able to distribute to you. So the aid application and the aid package is going to be considering you for your federal, state, and institutional sources. From there, we're going to talk about how to apply for that.
Hi, Ron. I'm Jim Sugiki, the Director of Financial Assistance at Bentley. So we'll start with how you complete a FAFSA. So you complete the FAFSA at it's actually studentaid.gov. This is a little outdated. Things change in the financial aid world often. The FAFSA is free. The first word in the acronym is free, so you should never pay for the FAFSA or pay for a service to help you complete the FAFSA. It's generally required by all colleges if you're going to apply for financial aid. In order to complete a FAFSA, you do have to create what used to be known as an FSA ID. I think they've moved to new language, which is a studentaid.gov ID. And both the student and their parent needs to complete that process and get an ID in order to complete the FAFSA. And when you fill out the FAFSA, essentially the student starts the process. They fill out the FAFSA and they invite their parent as a contributor to their FAFSA in order to complete the parent section. And when you complete the FAFSA, it's going to ask you to participate in the IRS Direct Data Exchange. And that's going to pull in your tax information from the IRS directly into the FAFSA so that you're not pulling out that tax form and trying to figure out which line goes where. It does it all for you. So it's very convenient and very fast and very simple to use. And you can save on the FAFSA. So if you get distracted in the middle of it, something happens, you can stop and start and come back to it later. And what you're actually putting on your FAFSA is information, demographic information, information about the student citizenship status. So you do have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident or other non-eligible non-citizen in order to complete a FAFSA. You have to put in colleges. So students can select up to 20 colleges that they'd like to send their FAFSA information to, and you can add all of those colleges right in the FAFSA. And then we have to report parent information. And so this is one of the things that trips people up sometimes is who is the right parent for the FAFSA. If you're married, both parents. If you are unmarried, but you still live together in the same household, both parents. If the parents are divorced or separated and they don't live together, the FAFSA has a great wizard. It's, I think, 4 questions long, and you answer those 4 questions, and it'll show you which parent needs to complete the FAFSA with the student. And then you're going to report information about who lives in your household. And then, as I said before, you'll use the IRS Direct Data Exchange to pull in your tax information. So the FAFSA is going to ask for both parent and student taxes. A lot of students don't have a tax return and don't file taxes. So when they go to get the information from the IRS, it'll come back and say there's no tax information on file, and that's completely fine. And then same thing with the parent information, you'll use the IRS Direct Data Exchange and pull in your tax information. It's also going to ask about assets for both the parent and the student. So you're going to input information about what you have available in your with cash in your saving account and your checking account. If you have any non-retirement investments, those get reported. If you have property other than your primary home that you live in, you would report that. If you have a business, you would report the value of that business. And if the parent has a 529 plan in the student's name, they would report that on the FAFSA as an asset. What you're not going to report is the value of your primary home that you live in, any retirement accounts that you have, and the value of any life insurance. So you just want to make sure that you're not accidentally reporting any assets that you shouldn't be reporting. And the FAFSA is not going to ask you about any debt that you have. So if you have credit card debt or mortgage, other consumer debt, it's not going to ask those questions. But you do want to be careful when you're reporting your assets to make sure that you're reporting the value of that asset minus any debt on that asset so that you're not saying, a rental property that you own is worth $500,000 and you have a $250,000 mortgage on it, you want to report the value of that investment as $250,000, not $500,000. After you submit your FAFSA, you're going to receive what's known as a FAFSA submission summary, and that's going to come to the student's email address. It's going to give you some information about what your student aid index is and show you, I believe, what colleges that you've sent it to. And at the same time that you're receiving that FAFSA submission summary, within the next couple of days, all of the colleges that you reported on your FAFSA are also going to receive your FAFSA information so that they can start having your information and work on their processes to award you aid. If you find after you've submitted your FAFSA that you've made an error and you need to go back and correct something, you can do that at studentaid.gov. And then the schools that received your original FAFSA will also receive that correction to your FAFSA. And up to 20 schools can receive your FAFSA. This is a change from a few years ago when it used to just be 10 schools. So now you can add a few more schools to your FAFSA.
I will throw in that if you go to FAFSA.gov, it should redirect you to studentaid.gov. That's why that is still in here.
All right. A select number of FAFSAs every year are selected for a process known as verification, which just means that the federal government has decided they want schools to collect a little bit more information about your file to make sure that everything looks correct. So if your FAFSA is selected for verification, the schools that you've applied to are going to reach out to you and ask for additional information. They might ask for signed copies of your tax returns and W-2 forms. They might ask for a worksheet to verify who lives in your household and if you have any untaxed income. So if that happens, don't worry. It's fairly routine. It happens to a certain percentage of students every year. And the schools will let you know what it is that you need to do in order to satisfy that verification requirement. You might be wondering why you should complete the FAFSA. Maybe you think, I'm not going to qualify for any need-based aid. Should I still do it? And we always encourage every family to complete the FAFSA, at least their first year of college. It's free to do. With the new changes to the FAFSA, it's very simple. It does not take very much time. So it's not a big lift. And some schools, even if you're not going to qualify for need-based aid, they may want you to complete a FAFSA to be considered for other types of aid, like academic scholarships. And it's the only way that you can qualify for a PLUS loan if you're looking to take out a federal loan as a parent to help your child pay for college. And the FAFSA is going to allow you to be considered for Pell Grants, the SEOG grant, TEACH grants, Iraq and Afghanistan service grants, work study, federal direct loans, and Parent Plus loans. So there's a lot of types of aid that come from completing a FAFSA. So we always encourage families to just go ahead and do it. All right. Some schools, not all, require an additional form for financial aid above and beyond the FAFSA, which is the CSS profile or the College Scholarship Service profile. And this is a College Board product. You complete the application at cssprofile.org, and the profile is available every year in October. There is a fee to complete the CSS profile. So unlike the FAFSA, which is always free, there is a fee for the profile. And if you are divorced or separated, many schools will ask that both parents complete their own profile. So there will be one parent who's the custodial parent, the one who completed this FAFSA, and then the other parent, the non-custodial parent, who should also complete a CSS profile form. So check with the schools that you're applying to see if that's the case, if they want a CSS profile to start with, and B, if you're divorced or separated, if they want that from both parents. So schools sometimes will require the CSS profile because they're looking for a more complete picture of your family's financial circumstances than what is provided on the FAFSA. The FAFSA asks a lot of questions about your family's financial circumstances, but it leaves out some details. So the FAFSA doesn't ask about the equity in your home. It doesn't look at any losses that you have on your tax return. And critically, they took away 2 years ago when they changed the FAFSA, the question about how many family members in your household are in college. And that question was used to basically give students with or families with multiple children in college at the same time more eligibility for aid. So the FAFSA no longer asks that. If you have two in college, you don't get a benefit from having two students in college at the same time on the FAFSA. So schools like Bentley that use the CSS profile, we still want to give that benefit of having two in college at the same time. And the profile asks that question and gives us that ability to still give that advantage to families. So if you have two in college at the same time, you have more expenses, we're taking that into account when you're applying for financial aid. It's also important to note that although the CSS profile does have a fee associated with it, you can get a fee waiver if you qualify for an SAT fee waiver or if your family income is less than $100,000. After you submit your profile, it's going to go to any of the schools that you've requested to receive it. And the CSS profile is going to send you an acknowledgement via email letting you know that it's been submitted. There is an option on the CSS profile to make a correction to any information that you realize you've made a mistake on, but it's only one time. So you can make one correction and send that out to all the schools. And if you messed up anything else and you want to correct anything else, you have to let the schools know individually that you've done something incorrect.
I'll jump in and note that the FAFSA and the profile are snapshots in time. So when we're talking about making corrections, it's because you made a mistake, not that you reported that I had $500 in the bank and then you took some out and you're now have $200 in the bank. They want to know from that date that you submitted it. It's more like, oh, did I accidentally report that I have $500,000 in the bank, but I only have 500? That's something you want to fix right away.
It's really important to note that every school is different. So some schools require a profile, some don't. Some schools require that you submit tax returns, some don't. So you want to check with every school that you're applying for financial aid and see what requirements they have and when they're looking for that information to be submitted by. We encourage families to create a spreadsheet or a document that lists all the colleges that you're applying to, what information it is that they're looking for, and then what are the deadlines for those forms so that you can stay on top of it and make sure that you're submitting everything for every college that you're applying for by the deadline. Because there's nothing worse than, receiving your acceptance letter and saying, "Where's my financial aid?" and realizing, oh, this college that's my dream school requires all these documents and we didn't submit them. It's really important as well to just go ahead and start your financial aid application with the schools that you're interested in, because submitting that FAFSA, submitting your profile is, getting you a record with that college, and so that they can start reaching out to you, sending you letters, letting you know what might be missing from your file, or maybe even start the conversation to ask questions if they have any questions or concerns about your file. Maybe it looks like something's wrong and they want to figure out what that might be. So, getting that application started early allows them to start contacting you.
Thanks, James. I'll go into a little bit about how need is determined and a little bit more about the student aid index, which is a term you might have heard. So when determining eligibility, we have the student aid index. If you have any experience with the FAFSA before 24-25, you might recall the expected family contribution. So the primary difference is the name. The SAI has replaced the EFC. There are some differences to the formula. In my There's a few more assets that are now considered that weren't before, but the interpretation is the same. The student aid index is a number that they're using to index a family's financial strength and their ability to absorb the cost of college. It's used to determine your eligibility for need-based aid. Like James said, with the application process, there's the standard federal formula, and some colleges are going to use an institutional formula, like using the CSS profile. Some colleges might have their own institutional requirements that aren't the CSS profile. They could have a separate form or a separate application. So when talking about all of those requirements and the deadline, you want to know each school what they actually are requiring, because it could vary from school to school. Now, the SAI is, it's not making an assumption of how a family will pay for college. It's just measuring the ability to absorb those costs. It is not a figure that's saying you must pay this amount. It's really up to the family to figure out how they're going to finance a student's education, and institutions are there to help you go through those financing options that you have available to you and all the different aid options. When determining the student aid index and determining eligibility, we're looking at the net income and net assets. So net income is your gross income after it's been reduced by federal and state taxes. There are also many allowances that might be applied against gross income. So the net figure is what's going into this calculation. And then there are additional parts of the formula to provide further protections of that net income. It's not just using your straight net income. There's lots of things that the formula knows you need to do, like save for retirement or save for other students' education. With net assets, as James also pointed out earlier, you're reporting the net value. So that's the value minus what is owed. If that's a negative number, you're reporting that as zero. So if you have $100,000 investment and a $200,000 debt on it, that is a zero value for that asset. Home equity is not included in the federal calculation. Be sure that you are not inadvertently including that as an asset on your FAFSA, but it will likely be asked for any institutional methodology like the CSS profile. So a lot of people have concern about how much assets might play into the calculation, but it's looking at both income and assets, but the income is really weighing more heavily. It's really an income-driven formula. Only about 6% we find or less of the net assets are actually factoring into the student aid index. And I'll give you a little example about how assets and income impact the SAI differently. So in this example, we're looking at the change in the total assets. So for family A and B, C, you see here that they have the same combined parent income. That's net income. And then you can see how the asset increase changes the student aid index. It's really not driving the needle that much. So the difference between $0 and $75,000 of assets in this formula is about $3,000. And between family A and family C, you can see with $150,000 that it's really driving it about just about doubling the SAI. Now you can see in this example how a bigger jump in income impacts the student aid index more significantly. So with just standard assets across the board for these families, you can see that $25,000 increases in family income are really increasing the SAI by a more significant amount. So you can just see how the assets are not playing into it as much as big changes in income are. And big changes in income are something you might want to think about if that's something that your family is experiencing and how it might affect your aid over the years. Talk to your financial aid counselors about those situations should they come up. All right, when we were talking about financial aid, this is like the main equation. This is how we're determining need. You take the cost of attendance, you subtract the student aid index, and that gives you your financial need. Now, the cost of attendance isn't just tuition and fees. It's your cost of housing, meals, books, and supplies, and any personal expenses that you're going to come across while you're attending a school. Again, the SAI is calculated from the income and asset information that you've provided on the FAFSA and other institutionally required forms. And the student aid index, that's not determining your need. It's this formula that is. So the cost of attendance, if the cost of attendance less the SAI is a positive number, that means that you have financial need. And just remember that need is a term that financial aid offices use to just determine your eligibility for aid. What you think that your family needs is going to have a different definition. So take that with a bit of a grain of salt there. I'm just going to show you this equation in action a little bit so you can understand that the sticker price, that's not the price that you're necessarily going to pay. So looking at that formula across 3 different costs of institutions, you can see that your need is going to vary based on the cost of attendance. If your student aid index is relatively similar across the board, then it's just going to be, your need is going to be higher at different institutions, lower at different institutions, and then those schools are going to try to meet that need in that calculation. So this example, you can see a school that might cost $75,000 as a sticker price for the year, and a family has a $15,000 SAI, that means they have $60,000 of need to fill with any type of sources that come from the state, from the federal government, or from the institution itself. And that might be gift aid, work funding, or student loans. And you can see down here as we go down through an out-of-state institution, while the cost of attendance is lower, the need is also lower. So we're trying to meet a lower amount of need and then going on further to an in-state institution. So don't discount those quote unquote more costly institutions, because it just means that you'll have higher need for additional funding through them. If you want to understand the SAI a little bit better, there is a published formula guide and a Pell Grant eligibility guide. I wouldn't call it light reading or necessarily super easy to decipher, but it is out there for you to investigate should you wish. There's also some really good tools through calculators, through the College Board. That's also where you do the CSS profile, as well as MIFA. They're a really great resource for financial aid materials. And I would encourage anyone to visit that site and look some of their stuff up. So that's a Massachusetts Education Financing Authority. And they're a great resource for families who are just starting to do their college financial aid journey. All right, back over to you, James.
All right. So you have completed your FAFSA and maybe your CSS profile, and the schools have your information and your SAI. And what does that translate to in terms of what types of aid are available? So the first bucket of aid is gift aid, which is sort of a financial aid term that basically means aid that you don't have to repay after graduation. There's 2 main types: scholarships, and those can be based on academic merit, it might be based on athletic ability or other like special characteristics. Oftentimes schools award these through their admission process, but you might have to fill out a separate application in order to be considered. So you want to make sure with each school that you're applying for that there's not a separate form that you need to complete in order to be considered for scholarships. And you also want to see with those scholarships, what are the requirements for renewal each year? Do you have to maintain a certain GPA? Do you have to participate in a program? So check on that before accepting. And then the second main bucket of gift aid are grants, and these are need-based. So this is, we're looking at your FAFSA or your CSS profile, and that snapshot that Lauren was talking about of your income and assets. For need-based aid, you do have to complete a FAFSA every year. So you'll need to make sure you do that annually, and your college will let you know by what date they're expecting that FAFSA each year. And then if your school requires the CSS profile, they may require it just in the first year, or they may require it every year. So you'll want to check on that as well. And again, what date it is they're expecting you to complete that form by in order to receive your aid each year. The next big bucket of aid is federal direct loans. These are awarded through your FAFSA, and they're from the Department of Education. They're taken out solely in the student's name. There's no credit check required. If you complete a FAFSA and you're eligible for federal aid, you're awarded these loans automatically. As a first-year student, the maximum amount is $5,500. That goes up to $6,500 in the second year and $7,500 in the third and fourth years. There are subsidized and unsubsidized components of those loans. So if you have financial need, you can receive up to $3,500 the first year in subsidized loan, and then $2,000 in unsubsidized. And then you can see it goes up each year. Right now, the interest rates on these federal direct loans are 6.53%. And that figure changes every year. So Congress sets the rates of the federal direct loans on July 1st each year. So you'll find out July 1st before you start college what the interest rate will be. And those interest rates are fixed for the life of the loan. And with federal direct loans, you're not required to start repaying those loans until 6 months after you graduate or stop attending school at least half time. So while you're in school, you're not expected to be repaying those loans. And there are multiple repayment options that are available. Typically, a repayment is 10 years, but it can be different depending on your circumstances. And it's important to note the difference between the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. So for the subsidized loan, the interest is paid by the federal government while you're in school. And then on the unsubsidized loan, interest begins accruing immediately upon disbursement of that loan. And again, you don't have to make any payments on that interest, but it is accruing. There's also student employment opportunities. So colleges typically have federal work-study funds that they're able to award to students. And each school has flexibility in terms of how they award that. So you may receive federal work-study from one school and not from another. And many schools also have their own institutional funds that they use to hire students as employees in addition to their federal work-study funds. And generally with work-study, the student applies for and receives a job on campus, and then they work however many hours, and they're paid a paycheck, every 2 weeks, every month, depending on the institution, based on the number of hours that they worked and their pay rate. So in Massachusetts, the minimum wage is $15 an hour, and that includes federal work-study positions. A question that we get a lot is, should I wait to apply for financial aid until after I'm admitted? Should I even bother completing a FAFSA and submitting all my documentation if I don't know if I've been admitted to a school? And our general advice is always to go ahead and apply for financial aid for every school that you're applying to. First of all, you'll get your financial aid package sooner and have a more opportunity to make an informed decision. And it does give the school a little bit more of a picture of you. So most schools are not need blind, and most schools don't meet full financial need. And again, Lauren kind of mentioned this earlier. Financial need is a financial aid term that we use to figure out how much aid you qualify for, and it's not necessarily how much financial aid you as a family think that you need to make college affordable.
Over to me.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, that there are a lot of sources. When we give out financial aid awards, we're looking at all the sources that are available to us, but there are also outside scholarships that students can be applying to through their high school, booster clubs, through their town, and also through these search engines. Now, those search engines like FastWeb, and there's a lot of them out there. You put as much information in or as little in as you want, and the job of that search engine is to connect you to scholarships it looks like you might be eligible for, and then you go ahead and apply for them directly. Now, each school might treat an outside scholarship differently, and I would say this is one of the top questions that you want to be asking each school. How would an outside scholarship impact other aid that I've been given by the institution? Because they're all going to be different, and it's just a difference of policy or budget. It cannot be used to replace your student aid index. That's sort of a set figure, but it can be used to fill any unmet need. So if you look back at that bar graph that we had, if you had $60,000 of need and a school was only able to meet 55,000 of it with the financial aid award, that might mean that you could get 5,000 of additional outside scholarship to cover that unmet need without impacting anything else in the financial aid award. Again, that's very specific to individual schools. They might all treat it differently. It's possible that they will use it to replace student loans. It's possible that they might replace federal work study with it. It's also possible that institutions might use it to replace need-based grant. I will say, a lot tend to try to maximize your aid that you're eligible for. That's what Bentley does. But you want to be sure that you're asking that question for each individual school. Another question we get a lot is, should I take out a home equity loan to pay for college? And this breakdown is kind of looking at how we think about financing an education. We're talking about past income, what can you pay out of present income, and what can you do out of future income? So in this example, say you have a balance for the year due of $25,000. Maybe you're dipping into parent and student savings to cover a portion of it. Maybe for current income, you're able to pay 2 bulk payments for fall and spring, or maybe the institution you're going to has a payment plan and you can spend $5,000 spread over, say, 10 months in order to pay a portion of that for the year, but you need something to make up for the rest of it. And that's what we call future income. That might be a private educational loan, or very often we see families utilizing a home equity loan because they have a good interest rate on it. Now, we don't have any preference or real recommendation about one being better over the other. It really is the family's choice and decision as to how to go about financing that difference with the quote unquote future income. So a home equity loan might be your best option, or you might be thinking about looking at a private education loan split between a parent and a student, a little bit in each of their name. There's a lot of different combination financing options you can look into. It's not just cut and dry that you have to do one or the other, and you don't have to do the same thing every year. Your financing options or plans or income might change, and you might be able to do more out of pocket through a payment plan in a future year or less. It just really depends on your financial circumstances and what you've determined the best plan is for you. We're also asked how much student loan debt is reasonable. And the rule of thumb for many years has been keeping your student loan debt less than the average annual starting salary of the degree you might be pursuing. I think this is a little easier said than done. You might not know what you're planning to do yet, so you really have to think about what can my family and I reasonably afford over time. Do a little research on this, see what's out there, but this has been the rule of thumb for quite a number of years. Ultimately, it's up to the students and families to determine what is worth your time, your money, your efforts, and what's the value that you're taking from your institution that you're choosing. All right. Does applying early decision affect aid? So it depends. There are benefits to applying for early decision. Some schools actually have higher admit rates for early decision students. You can also really cut short that process of stress. In most cases, it's hard to say. I would say it could mean that you have a better chance of getting in. It could mean that individual schools are looking at more aid for those students. But at Bentley, it's not impacting any kind of need-based aid eligibility. If you apply early decision or you apply regular decision, there's no change in how much need-based aid you're going to receive. This is also a question you can ask of individual schools because they might differ, and I would if you were strongly considering going early decision. But one of the things to consider is that early decision 1 and 2 are binding programs. So if you apply, get in, and opt to go there, you will withdraw your other applications to other institutions. In some places, an agreement might be broken if you apply for aid and you can demonstrate that financial aid package really isn't making it affordable for you to attend that school. And whether or not ED or regular decision impacts your aid is really dependent on the school. I like to say, it does cut down on the stress of where am I going to go? And you might really know where you want to be, and you just want to get that done and have your decision made. But if you're the type of person that wants to get all of the aid awards that you're eligible for from all these institutions and weigh your options side by side, then regular decision might be the better choice for you. It's really a personal choice. And some people do ask about early action. Some institutions have it, some don't. That's a non-binding college application process. So that's something that you might look into if you're not ready to go fully early decision, if it's an option at an institution that you're interested in. Oh, and be mindful that deadlines for early decision are going to be earlier typically than regular decision applications. So those differing deadlines are going to be all over the place if you're going early decision at one school and regular decision at other institutions. All right, a little bit about how to get help. So again, that FAFSA.gov is really studentaid.gov. It will redirect you there, but there's also the 800 number that you can contact if you're having any difficulty completing the FAFSA. You can find information about the CSS profile and general information from the College Board through that website. MIFA, again, a great resource. Also a resource if you're looking for financial aid presentations in Spanish, they have a really good one. If you need help completing applications, I think financial aid offices are one of your best bets. James and my email addresses are there. We're happy to answer questions if you have them. One thing I do like to mention is if you have special circumstances that you don't think that your application has captured, you want to explain these to the individual financial aid offices. So especially because we're looking at 2-year prior information, your 2024 income might be very different from your 2025 income and or 2026. So if anything's changing, when there's something you just can't get onto an application, it's not asking, make sure that you're notifying those institutions, all of them, about your special circumstances. Now I think we'll open it up to questions.
All right, we've got some good questions in here for you guys. So this is a common question that we get a lot from families, especially when they're filling out the FAFSA form. They're wondering if their child can see their tax information that they have linked into FAFSA.
So the FAFSA, and James, you can weigh on this too. It's owned by the student. So if a student has the student, like they can log in, they would be able to log into their FAFSA and see information. But I don't know that people really do. James, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so when you complete the IRS Direct Data Exchange, it actually doesn't show you what the AGI is that it is brought over from the IRS. So logging into the FAFSA itself, you're not going to see like this is the information unless you have had to manually enter that information because the direct data exchange didn't work for some reason. So for many families, the student's not going to be able to log in and just see that information. But once schools have their FAFSA and CSS profile and things, that is considered the student's application. The student is the primary point of contact for schools. So it is possible at that point that the student could see or learn that information.
I think institutions are highly aware about the sensitivity of financial information, particularly between households, should they be separated households, and that parents are, doing the financial aid application for the most part. So we're very aware of this. We're not just throwing it into an email and sending it along to the student. We're sensitive that this is sensitive data.
So the next question that we have, and this is in regards to the executive order that happened today, that's aiming at dismantling Department of Education. What happens to things like FAFSA and Pell Grants? I understand that people may not know, but I'm concerned. This family is concerned and wants to make sure people would like to have some reassurance in regards to the colleges, considering how to approach their problem.
Wish I had a crystal ball because I think we're all thinking that same thing. I can't guarantee anything in terms of what the government's doing, but everything that we're being told is that Pell Grant and federal student aid are going to continue to be administered. And that is the information that we have right now from the federal government.
Okay, and then the next question. Guys, please feel free to add any other questions because we do have, right now there's one question left. So if you have questions, definitely, please feel free. I think you already answered this question, and I think, Dana, you also responded. So a family asked in regards to the FAFSA file on the FAFSA and CSS. And one of the questions was in regards to, is this required every year? And I know you answered the question saying that yes, for the FAFSA and the CSS, it depends on the school. It could be 1 year, it could be multiple. The family is also wondering because if they have two children, do they need to fill out both of these documents? Especially the FAFSA, do they need to follow for both children and fill out two different forms?
Yes, you will have to complete a FAFSA for both children in college. And if both children's schools require a CSS profile, you would have to complete one for each school, for each child.
Yeah, it's connected to that student's social security number and their information. So that's why it's an individual application. We sometimes see people, if they have twins, that they only complete one application. So make sure you're doing it for each of your children.
Please feel free to put any other questions in the Q&A. I'll give you a few minutes. Oh, one question that I had, Lauren, that I had sent to you is, have you noticed a difference in the amount of aid students are receiving with the new FAFSA changes?
Yeah, James and I were just looking at this today. We've noticed that there are many more students that have become Pell eligible, which is what they had told us was intended to happen. So there has been some noticeable changes there. In terms of Bentley institutional, we're finding it to be pretty consistent because we have institutional methodology. So we're looking at things in more depth. I don't think that it's hard for us to gauge how the number in college situation, like the removal of that from the federal side of things, is really impacting because we still look at it. We are still incorporating that into our methodology. So that hasn't impacted our students, the number in college, because we're still considering it. So that's one thing I can't really speak to, only because we use both forms.
Thank you. And then another question that I have, our family, I know last year with the FAFSA changes and the new FAFSA form, families were running into a lot of issues, and it took a while for them to get their aid information, the financial aid packets. Have you noticed any of that, and are you guys getting your material in a timely manner this year compared to last year?
Thankfully, things are much, much better and smoother this year. The FAFSA was available before December 1st, so the Department of Education actually, you know, exceeded their expectations in terms of when that would be available to families. And we started receiving FAFSA information immediately upon it being available to families. So a vast improvement over last year. And we're very pleased about that.
That's awesome to hear. All right, we have a couple more questions. Thank you guys for adding more questions. If you don't receive aid the first year, are there any benefits to reapplying for the remaining 3 years?
Yeah, I think it depends. If you're going to apply for the remaining 3 years, I would say if you've had a change, right? So for us, I can use us as an example. If you apply and there's only one sibling in college in year one, and that's you, and then you have a younger sibling going into college afterwards, a year or year two later, it's possible that that might trigger eligibility for need-based aid. Those are things that financial aid counselors can generally give you information on if income and assets stay relatively the same. You can ask that question when you're getting your financial aid applications and your financial aid awards rather, and they should be able to look and kind of give you rough estimates of how having two in college might change your eligibility. If you experience a change in your total income, it goes down for whatever reason, then yes, it's something that you'd want to pursue again. But if things stay relatively the same, income assets number in college, then I would expect that you would get the same award year after year, and that really is dependent on what you get year one.
Thank you. In addition to scholarships, grants, and federal loans and employment, what other aid do schools offer?
That's the gist.
That's it. That's
yeah,
it, really.
Yeah, when we're reviewing you, we're trying to review your eligibility from all sources that we have available to us, as from like the earlier slides. That's state grant, federal grant, institutional grant, and any academic scholarships that you're eligible for through the admission process. All of those things can go to meet your need-based eligibility. Federal student loans are going in. That's the FAFSA application that determines that, as well as any student employment. James had mentioned that there's flexibility with student employment. So you might get work study from one school, but not from another, because that's an allotment. Where if you're a Pell Grant recipient, you should be getting Pell at all of the schools that you apply to, because that's an entitlement, if you will. So there's different funds that institutions get from various sources, like the state or like the federal government, and we sort of just dole it out until it is gone. For us, you might get the SEOG grant one year, but not get it the next year. And it's just that we would replace that with Bentley grant instead. So we're looking at total gift aid from all sources that are available to us. Outside of that, you'd really be applying to scholarships that are outside of the university. Typically, institutions are trying to give you all the money that they know to help fill that need.
Thank you. Are commuter students likely to get less aid than those that enroll in room and board?
You want to take that one, James?
Yeah. So yes, the cost to commute from home is less than the cost to live on campus. So you would have less eligibility for financial aid as a commuter student.
But it doesn't mean that it's going to cost the same necessarily. It would, a lot of people choose to commute because it's going to be a little less expensive. But if you remember that formula, the cost of attendance minus the student aid index equals your need. A lower cost of attendance by not having those room and board charges means that there's going to be less eligibility, like James said, but it still could be cost saving to do so because you don't have other expenses that you would have living on campus.
Right. This one is just more of a clarification. A parent said, I thought you said the second app considers the number of students in the college, but I assume nothing is considered until more than one child is actually enrolled. So this particular family has a child who's a junior, and then a couple years later, they'll have twins going. So I think they're just trying to figure that piece of the process.
Right, year after year. So I kind of alluded to that when you reapply, and it depends on institutions, but just using us as an example, you apply in year one, you have need, you get a financial aid award. You apply in year two and you have a sibling going into college. For us, that's going to increase your eligibility. If everything else stays relatively the same, income, assets, and the only difference is that you have another sibling in college, that is going to impact your calculation and make you have more need for need-based aid. And we will consider that and increase your award. And vice versa happens. If you are year one, there are two of you in college, and then year two, the older sibling graduates, that's going to decrease your eligibility for need-based aid.
Thank you. Then the next question is, does the FAFSA look at one parent household income differently?
Do you mean like a single parent?
Yep, single family.
So yeah, it's only looking at that custodial parent. James, feel free to check me on anything I'm about to say. But yeah, so it's if their parents are separated, divorced, or just unmarried and never living together, it's whoever's considered your custodial parent for the FAFSA. And then for institutional purposes, like we said, we would collect information for both parents.
All right. I think there was one other question. Dana, do you see the question?
Yep,
I think it was asking about.
People were wondering when the next year's FAFSA was going to be out, and right now we anticipate it to be October 1st. So we're good.
Okay.
Super. Well, you have exhausted all of our questions, including the ones we sent you earlier. So I want to take a moment to thank James and Lauren for being with us this evening from Bentley University. Always a pleasure to have you both and give our families a frame of reference for the financial aid process. They generously offered if folks want to reach out to them, but also we can attest to the fact that MIFA is a fabulous resource for Massachusetts, and those people are wonderful to reach out to and help you walk through any nuances. The Needham High School counseling webpage also has a lot of financial aid information on that, so feel free to use that as a resource as well as you begin this journey to figure out the finances for the post-secondary process. So thank you, James. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Aisha, for joining us from the department. Just to remind folks that this has been recorded and we will post it on the counseling website probably by tomorrow morning or so. So you can refer to it and also let folks know who couldn't join us this evening that they can find the recording there. So appreciate your time this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next year with the rest of our parent evenings that are available. So please check the website and you'll find out when they are. So again, thank you to our panel and Aisha, and we hope you have a good evening. Take care.